Welcome, folks. This is House Corrections and Institutions. It's again Thursday, March 23rd, and we're continuing our work on putting together our capital budget. Our little repro group of Mary Morrissey and Chip Triano and Troy Hedrick have been working since probably the beginning of February on looking at previous capital bill allocations and appropriations of projects and look at any project balances that are older than 2 years old to see if those dollars are encumbered or not, how much has been spent and how much is just sitting there, not going out the door and not being encumbered. And they've done a lot of work. They've been working with our joint fiscal office. I'm going to turn it over to Dan Dickerson, and you can walk us through what they've come up with. And even though we may have a number, I just want to forewarn the committee, it is still pretty fluid in some ways. For one piece, it's going to be pretty, it will get people's attention.
Dan Dickerson with the Joint Fiscal Office. Before I start going through the document, I'll sort of set the table for, I think, where the focus of this subcommittee was, and we all paid careful attention to appropriations that were really, 5 years old and older, because I think the consensus among the four of us, although me only being staff, is that we really need to make sure agencies, if they're going to propose spending authority, we need to make sure that money gets out the door in a reasonable time frame. And this document represents that. In addition, a few agencies pointed out some funds that are a little more recent that could be reallocated, so those are there too. But I think the big picture, we really paid close attention to those old funds, and there are some old funds out there, not huge amounts, but they're out there. So with that said, general reallocations, and this document is broken up into two pieces. One is a section of general reallocations, and then one that there are proposed reallocations, but the committee would like, or the subcommittee would like for those to be repackaged with some different requirements. So starting with the general reallocations, this first item, finance and management, this is the one that's probably potentially going to be fluid. As of February 1st, finance management had $3 million of unspent money for an enterprise resource planning software expansion. So this is going to be a platform called VT Buys. I believe all of the sort of the purchasing and contracting processes for the state are going to filter into this platform instead of where they currently go, which is the vision system. The vision system is what we do for basically all of our accounting. It's an Oracle product. As of March 20th, the word we got from finance management is there's 2.4 million unspent. Their statement was that they were on track to spend the money by December 31st, but this money goes back to 2016. And so the subcommittee decided to pull all that back and let them come in and make an argument for why they should keep this very dated funding.
So of the 2.4 million, I'm expecting that. Of the 2.4 million, none of that is encumbered, even for the December.
None of it is encumbered.
And no detail.
And no details in terms
it took a little bit of prodding to get good, not even really good information, but some information.
3 times.
3 times, and they still couldn't come up with it. Eric, you're not delivering the message, are you?
I'm just curious who you're talking to about this project, because I'm working on it.
The appropriation is finance and management, so I've reached out directly to Commissioner Gresham.
Okay. I think Doug Parnham's the project sponsor.
But when he go to Doug?
Yeah, let me just make sure that people are making connections, because I know this is a going concern.
Well, they will now.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. Delighted to have visibility on this. Thank you.
So this is the software expansions program. We did this a long time ago. These dollars go back how many years? To
2016.
2016, calendar or fiscal?
I believe that was the 2016 session, so it would have been FY17. is when they were-
And this project did a hard stop on COVID, so it was up on blocks for well over a year.
It wasn't COVID though a year or two after the 2016, 2017.
Yeah, I mean, it was 4 years after.
Right. So there's, I'm sorry,
No.
Eric, I'm so sorry.
COVID was 4 years after that, Mary, you're right.
Okay,
I'll get a.
So this is for updating our Vision and Oracle system.
No.
This is for moving a piece of what is currently done through Vision into a different platform, which would be BT Buys. And that is supposed to go live sometime. I've gotten emails about it, but I don't really know much beyond that.
These are bonded dollars.
These are bonded dollars.
We used to do IT on the Capitol bill.
Well, we used to do it, but we don't anymore.
Some of us pushed back, said, hey, we don't have the capacity. And you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars when you're getting into IT projects.
It's not hardware of any sort.
It's
Software.
licenses and buying the software, and this is a world of IT, so sometimes you can bond for a shorter period of time than 20 years. But the capital bill was being used to fund our IT projects. Whatever your name is over there.
This big guy was a problem on the back bench. Yeah, just call me Bill Horn. And again, I'm sure there's gonna be another conversation between finance and management and you guys about this, but just so you know, the commissioner was in yesterday, I believe, talking about automating our contracting system. All of the RFPs and procurement for the state is going into BT Buys. So from pencils to plow trucks is gonna run through this system. And it's independent of Vision and all of the other accounting platforms. This is contracting.
So we have an agency of digital services, and they have money. Would there be any money in the agency of digital services that could go to this?
that's what we talked about, that there may be other sources, but we just would like to have some solid information. I mean, 7 years out of this money sitting there is not acceptable. Sorry.
So you
Especially,
started out at 3 million.
They started out at the beginning of
or-
the current fiscal year with, how does this report spit out? The report spits out what is in the appropriation as of the date of the report, which would have been February 1st. That was 3 million. I looked back at the original appropriation, and you know, I think there were two separate appropriations that I could see, 2016, 17, and I think they added up to something like 9 or 10 millions. So they have sped down, but
And
I don't have all
even, and even to make the 3 whatever million it was, they just came back yesterday with that they had somehow spent a little portion that brought it down to the 2.4. And even that wasn't a clear message. So it's like, sorry.
So by the time they spend it, the software they had anticipated, the software is going to be updated.
That's what I said yesterday. That happened a number of years ago
Yeah.
when they changed, they were trying to change a couple of the systems. By the time they did it, state government, it was antiquated and they had to pull it all back and for the departments. So I just want to know where they're going from here.
yeah,
Right?
the same thing. I mean, you changed the policy for a reason, and this money was hung out there back before this policy was changed. It's probably time to revisit it because not that the project should necessarily not go forward, but software lasting 20 years. What I can remember just on my home computer, how many softwares are.
I hear you, Wayne, and you're right.
Done.
That's why we've stopped doing it going forward. But these are previously allocated capital dollars that we funded this project at the cost of 9 to 10 million over a couple capital year budgets. That what our repro committee is saying is they feel that 2.4 million of that is just sitting there. It's not encumbered. It's bonding capacity that's being used up, and let's reallocate it to our current capital budget. That's what it's being said. So that we don't lose those bonded dollars. So we shall see where this will land, and I just want to be cautious on the committee. Don't count your chickens before they're hatched.
You know,
Because there's a lot of hatching that needs to happen here. It's a good number. You may end up being that. May not. So let's keep going.
Okay. So moving down, there are several little bits of money in the BGS realm that are relatively aged that we decided to pull back. So 2013, there's $365, pretty big money. 2015, there's 65,463.17. 2016, for major maintenance, there's 219,519.77. Another 2016 is 6,175 for Roxbury Fish Hatchery. I will note here that this is one that BGS identified as a reallocation item. So it's not something that we would be pulling back against their will. This 6,000.
Is that the only one of the whole list?
This next one, 2017, 14,833 is another one they suggested. The 2018, the 24,000 is a combination of two items that they suggested for reallocation. And then this 2020 is 32,780. So the subcommittee was focused on the really old money, but then they gave us a few bits from newer money that they thought could be reallocated.
So there was the Roxbury facilities grants, various projects and major maintenance.
Yeah. Moving on to page 2, Sergeant at Arms Office. There's 2,000 from a previous appropriation for new chairs.
We don't have.
No, we did.
You're sitting in.
Yeah, these are.
I thought they were-
there were some.
We did that.
We were holding this money in the event that, you know, a new chair was needed here and there, but given that sort of we're looking at older money, I felt comfortable giving this back, and that we can fund new chairs elsewhere on an ad hoc basis if we need to.
I mean, this committee gets involved in a lot in terms of this building and how our colleagues operate, you know, buying some of these desks, chairs, microphone system. You know, all of that evolves in this committee.
Design the chair.
It's, you know, some people complain, in fact, they don't know to complain to us.
Okay, education agency, money from 2020. This is 34,000 that the agency got back to us on that we could reallocate. So they're fine with this. These amounts under Forest Parks and Rec, these all on paper were encumbered, but when I emailed to get information on what these are encumbered for, the message we got back was they were still encumbered on either legacy projects or projects that were completed. So they were going to unencumber them and then re-encumber them to newer projects. And the committee decided, no, we're going to pull that money back. And then finally, DC, sort of a similar scenario. You know, a previous municipal pollution control grant process left them with 64,000 remaining. The message we got was they would reallocate that to newer grants, and we said, no, we'll take that money.
Because once you start doing that,
Oh,
you're gonna totally lose
it'll
track
be a
of our
field,
$100.
it'll be a field day.
Yeah. So the grand total for general reallocations is 2.96 million, but if you subtract out finance and management, because we don't know I'm sure they're gonna come in not very happy. That's 520,000.
Oh, well.
So
Do it on the Senate.
So reallocations for specified use. So these are dollar amounts that are also in some cases very old, but are money that either BGS or the Vets Home has set aside for Vets Home projects. The subcommittee would like to reallocate these, but have the money go back to BGS and Vets Home, but with a very short leash as far as potentially how long the spending authority lasts. And they would like to see a report probably in the beginning of next session of where they is this money going out the door, because it's been out there for a while.
So.
And that's 490,000 total.
So you're keeping the same projects, right? BGS various projects, kitchen renovation, resident care furnishings, and security access system and safety. You're keeping those same projects. You're saying you're pulling all the money back because it hasn't moved. So you're putting back 490,000 into our capital bill for the Vets Home, but for these projects. And then you want to report back. So it's not increasing what we are doing in the Vets Home in our capital budget spreadsheet. It's just, you're pulling the money back and you're saying, look, get off the dime. You've got these projects, do it, and then report back. Or if we just leave the money here with no instructions about it, it's just gonna sit there.
Right.
Is that the thinking?
That's the thing.
Okay, Wayne.
So why? I mean, we've got a mold problem in the kitchen that was there with money allocated in 2017. That's 6 years ago. And if that mold problem is a real problem, you
That's
mean
the
to tell me
question.
you wouldn't-
That's the
So
question.
why wouldn't we just pull it back? If they really have a mold problem, why don't they come back in and tell us about it and we appropriate it for them coming up?
Folks, repro, is it connected to federal dollars coming in? Paul?
Probably not.
You just didn't get a response from the Vets Home about it, but you don't want to
Well,
penalize them in
yeah.
case they're ready to go forward?
I think in the background, I'm not 100% familiar with the Vets Home operations, but I do know that, there have been sort of issues in the past and they're working to resolve and get everything up to date. So we were cognizant of that, which is why we sort of, instead of just pulling the money back completely, sort of found a middle ground of, we'll let you keep this, but with different, we're gonna put it all in one sort of pot, and really, which would allow us to really scrutinize it next year when we come back. If it's still there, then maybe they don't need it that bad.
And sometimes the funding for the Vets Home gets a little mushy because they get on the list and then you get federal reimbursement.
Well, I was going to
It's a
say, and I
math
think
situation,
that
yeah.
has been some of the problem. They also, even before COVID, had issues with employment for folks working there. So it would always be this, and that's why even one of the units at one point was closed down. So there's been a couple, but they now have a waiting list of people wanting to get in. And so these projects are a top priority to get through. So, but I think it is that federal connection because it's always after the fact.
So we do have some old money there, 10, 12 years old, 10, 11 years old. And those are smaller amounts, but then you do have in 17, you do have that mold issue kitchen.
And there's additional.
Yeah. So what you're recommending is 490,000 plus be reallocated in our bill, but that doesn't go to replace that 490. Doesn't go to replace the projects we're already funding in the Vets Home. The 490 stays with these projects that are listed here to say, get these, if you're gonna do these projects, you gotta get them going this fiscal year, because it's report back next year on how much of this has been expended or encumbered and for what. So it's a wash. It doesn't go into our total 2.960.
And I think the intent was just to, because it's sort of a last, I mean, we're getting this finished in the last minute, to keep it simpler for the projects that are already hopefully happening. I think the intent was for the money that's currently under BGS would keep that money, but it would be, you know, instead of like just general maintenance, it would be Vermont Vets Home maintenance. And then the money that's already with the Vets Home would stay with the Vets Home for resident care furnishings and security systems. So it would be two separate line items, but with, you know, with at the very least additional reporting. You know, you'll report back January 15th or maybe before November, and then potentially if you wanted to limit the time frame of the spending authority, you could do that.
So what date are you suggesting to the report back? Middle of January, or be reviewed
We
next
didn't
year?
talk
You
about a
didn't talk
date. I
about
would
it?
say
I think January 15th.
January 15th, and then next year when we get the review 3 again. You still want to be on that committee? You
Stuck forever.
could we give
Oh,
it a
yeah.
pretty?
Can you imagine doing this kind of work as a full committee? You guys would, there'd be a mutiny.
Well, the potential benefit to some of the language that's in the capital bill would be, hopefully, we would get some of this information on the get-go, the way that you would reframe how the unspent capital funds are reported. Currently, you know, they're only reporting the number. They're not giving any context. So hopefully we get some of that context up front, and then the conversation during the session can be, okay, here's a little bit more that we would like to have, instead of us having to sort of start from scratch. Because it's time consuming.
So, all told, what you really found was about 3.4 million plus, of which you reallocated the reallocations to the reallocations.
And then some.
And that's,
So
so,
to speak.
so then with finance and management, the big piece of 2.4 million, there's 2.9 million. And I'm gonna caution the committee, don't be evil. We don't know if that's gonna stay. It could stay for our purposes in terms of getting the bill out, but it's got a long process to go. It's got to go to the ropes, and then it goes to Senate institutions. So I'm sure that some of this money will change.
We were very understanding of that.
But we're pretty solid in terms of knowing there's at least $500,000. We're pretty solid. And that $500,000 could take care of the 375 on the bonded line if we wanted to do that. So then that leaves us about 200,000 to do. Okay. And then we have the 2 danglers, which we've been asking BGS to go out and look to give us some more dollar figures on that. And I'm assuming they're still working on that, right, Eric? I beg your pardon? They're
Danglers.
still working on dollar figures for the 2
Yes.
danglers.
I
Okay.
asked,
So to bring Becky up to speed, and what we did, there's 2 money danglers out there, state house expansion. For how much we can get for what, and you got the language in there in the new draft from the discussion that I had with the Sergeant at Arms and the JFO about the management committee. So that's already taken care of. The issue is we gotta figure out a dollar thing. We need it. The other dangler is the HVAC systems within the correctional facilities. And the thing that the committee has worked on is decided is a 2-prong approach that, and we don't know what the dollar amount will be, but a 2-prong approach that BGS, of course, will work with DOC, figure out which facilities we can at least put in some, I don't know how to phrase it, but some HVAC system within some of the common rooms or rooms that might be able to relieve some of the issues revolving around the high heat in the buildings. That maybe you could do the dining area, maybe you could do a day room just to provide some relief to our staff and even our residents there, that they look at that, as well as at the same time prioritizing a facility that would need a full HVAC system. So it's a dual approach. Look at our current facilities where we could implement some HVAC systems in some of our common rooms to help alleviate the pressure, as well as looking at which facility really should be totally upgraded in our HVAC system. And we just haven't figured out money yet. So those are the two pieces.
Is that a bonded dollars in FY '24, a line item and
We're not ready yet, because it depends how we're gonna move money around, because we do have 1.8 million of the cash fund that we have not used. So the policy decision to try to tap some of that. We have about 300,000 in cash we haven't really used. It's kind of out there. Do we tap that? Do we move something from bonded dollars that we already have back into a cash fund and then use bonded dollars for HVAC? And the state house expansion, we got some of those decisions. BGS is trying to, we've asked what it would be, what they would need on top of the $500,000 for the correctional HVAC systems. And we're not putting anything in it, basically would be on paper. And then what is really needed for state house expansion. And the committee really feels that the correctional facilities are a priority over the state house expansion. So that's where we landed on that. So then another language change that we want to spend time on is with the correctional facility, the reentry, the women's. Many of us got an email yesterday from the network concerned about the number of beds and really wanting us to delay any construction work or planning based around number of beds. I'm thinking that's where we are anyway, in that we're not even looking at bed counts. The language that we're really looking at is a priority of, you can move out of that seat if you want.
Yeah.
Chair.
I don't know if we want to put Becky in that seat or if she wants to stay.
And by the way, Dan has been incredible working with us, so thank you.
Thank you,
Find this email from, that came from Sarah.
Sarah Robinson yesterday, I think.
Yes,
But 2 days
Yes,
ago?
I think it was yesterday.
it was
That was
yesterday.
yesterday.
Yes.
So I know that we're not talking about that. I mean, that is further down the road, but I think we need to be really clear in our language so everybody out there knows what we're going to be looking at. We have to this point said that we're really looking at the land piece. That's where we're really at, is the land piece. And Becky, where is the language? Is there language in this 1.3 draft at all about the land priorities at all?
yeah, it's in the policy section.
Yeah.
Let me just,
Section
I mean, it's all highlighted because it's
new.
new, but also just not really, I don't think the committee came to it.
Right, we did
Decision.
section 26 in our new draft of 1.3. It's on our website.
It's sort of just placeholder.
It's a place. So it's the intent that when we're evaluating site locations, the preferences will be given to state-owned property. And that this
That's
proposal
clarified.
would consider co-location of the facilities and campus style approach. That's what we have said. So. Troy,
Can you say that last part again? Campus style and what were the words?
Sure.
campus style approach.
Michelle.
Proposals shall consider co-locating the facilities in a campus style approach. That's on page 31, it's section 26 of our draft. And we have prioritized looking at state-owned property first before you go out and look at purchasing land. So that's as far as we've got for that. So I'm open to discussion on this.
Yeah, can I get a little bigger picture first? And this is a point I've made before, and I think it's been, well, I've heard it misrepresented or restated in ways that don't quite fit for me.
What time is that? This afternoon.
If you are available earlier than 11:25, we're running ahead of schedule and could take testimony at 11:10 or 11:15.
That's me. I need to be down there. So are they down there now doing this? It's not us that's doing it. It's legislative council.
I believe that they probably are.
Hold the fort, keep talking. Don't destroy anything. Please don't destroy anything.
Take down some walls. Can we?
I'm downstairs and go up. So
I know.
tell them I'm on my way.
Okay.
Damn it.
So my worries here are that we're not. So Commissioner Fitch yesterday kind of brought this back to the table about how prisons have overall improved incrementally over the, since we started building prisons, however long ago. And I want to reiterate that still means nobody has ever gotten it right. Nobody has ever built a prison that stands the test of time as being a humane institution. Nobody has. And I think it's presumptuous for us to think that we can, right? The history of humankind is inexcusably and undeniably that we build bad prisons, that 20 years later, 30 years later, 40 years later, people look at and say, how did we do that? I think it's really important. We are about to kick this boulder down the hill. That is what we are about to do. And people have done this before, and our track record is terrible when you look at it in hindsight. And I know that that's the only way we can evaluate it, but I think we have an absolute obligation to wonder what incarceration is going to look like 50 years from now. I think we have that obligation. And we have a lot of information that shows us that we are reinventing how people become justice involved, and we are lowering those numbers. We have a lot of information that our buildings and institutions are causing harm to the incarcerated and to the workers. That is undeniable as far as my perspective goes. So we have an opportunity here to dream big, and I am really worried that all we've seen so far are indications that we're just making a prettier prison, whether that's what the chairs look like, what the walls look like, maybe a little bit of layout stuff. I am really worried that we are not dreaming big enough. So when we start talking about land acquisition, I also think we have misunderstood some of that dreaming that has been in the room about what secure housing, I don't think anybody's talking about building 36 different houses around the state and trying to staff that. But if we are looking at 25 acres, if we are looking at 50 acres, campus style, co-located, whatever, we have to wonder how that space is going to look 30 years from now, 40 years from now, 50 years from now. And I don't think we did a good job in this committee of hearing from people who have lived in our facilities. We didn't do a good job this week. And I wish I would have interrupted that process, and I didn't, and I feel bad about that. And I think there are things in 438. I think a working group can exist alongside whatever we do here. And I think that's an important thing to consider. I think there are a few other things that Brian brought into the room out of 438 that could just easily be cut and pasted into language as we commit to spending, I think it's $15 million. So I would just urge us to consider that. Because we are at a pivot point here that is, yeah, historically not gone well in hindsight. I'll stop there.
Interesting.
Thank you, Troy. Really, I guess a couple of things I want to say. One is, and I've made this point a couple of times, and it just keeps coming back to mind. You know, if we look at another area of our public health, our public infrastructure, take emergency rooms and hospitals. They're horrible, horrible environments. Disease and death, you know, medically caused death is the second or third biggest cause of death in the US. And we're not going to stop building hospitals. We're not going to stop needing those. And they're also not meant to be a home. They're not meant to be a home. It's not meant to be a place that someone is happy with, that they have done everything to shape that environment and make it their long-term home. It's meant to be a temporary place where someone resides while they're getting what they need to go to the next place. So I don't know why incarcerated facilities are, you know, we're talking about very different things and to poke holes in what I'm saying about healthcare is not incarceration. But I also don't know that they're not that different. Why we're going to need these facilities. They're not going to be great ever. They're not going to be someplace that someone would choose to reside in permanently. If we look at the statistics of who's in there, there are, I'm very confused with Representative Chino and other people saying we need secure residential, but somehow operated differently than corrections. That corrections does secure residential. That's what they do. I'm also, I feel like I'm open to really big picture thinking. I feel like I'm open to, like, you know, setting our sights high, but I think we have to be also, if we're not acknowledging the realities of the situation, that thinking is going to be flawed. And I think we may do a disservice to the population. You know, we all probably got this ACLU flyer, and I looked at their vision of our prison system, and they say everything about our prison system is a policy choice. And they map out these, it looks really nice. And there's some couple things that I don't see anywhere on here. I don't see survivors.
Exactly.
I don't see individuals who commit offenses. It's as if survivors and individuals that do real offenses are not a thing in their vision. And so why don't we give them just nice housing and get them back into the community as quickly as possible? I would like to do that, but I would like to be really realistic about what we're dealing with. And I'll just stop. Thank you.
So what did I miss? Did you bring up trying to put in some language?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and just kind of guiding
Okay.
what's,
So let's take a step back. Let's look at the language we have before us first. Are we in agreement at this point with the language about evaluating the site locations, preferences given to state-owned properties? Do this step by step before we get into dealing with some of these other issues. So then we got to deal with what's before us, We have 1.5 million that we had last year. You got 1.5 million for FY '24. So what are we gonna accomplish between now and when we come back in terms of the moving pieces that need to occur to get to a point of schematic design? We're not at schematic design. And Eric's sitting over there with the 1.5 last year and the 1.5 in this year's FY '24. Is that going to get us to schematic design by next session?
I will need to confirm.
Because
But
you-
it should keep us moving and we should get there. Wait, I'm
correction.
sorry, I'm doing math in public in my head.
You got 3 million bucks.
Yeah.
Part of the 1.5 from last year has already been expended for HOK. So there's a balance there, what, maybe $1 million? With $1.5 million in FY '24, you got 2.5 million. What is that gonna get us by next session?
This conversation is too important for me to be guessing, so let me.
That's the crux that we need to know, so that we know what that's gonna be used for. Probably might be used to put. Not gonna be enough to purchase land. They could put options on something. It might be enough to figure out, do some testing on some state-owned property, possibly. Okay, that we know. We're not gonna get into bed counts. We won't know that between now and January, February. I think we've got to be clear about that and maybe put some language into that effect. And I think that's as far along as we can go. No, they're not. I was just down there.
Yeah, and then just as you left, they said they were going on break. And now they say Alice should be back there. We will proceed without her.
Well, they're having legislative council present the bill.
Tucker Anderson. I think.
Yeah, and he was someplace else and they didn't think they were letting him that. I'm not going down. I'm staying here. This is a Springfield charter.
Yeah, they'll all charge.
So that's where we are here. So then the question is, for a bigger picture of how we're gonna look at replacing the women's correctional facility and the reentry facility. There's a lot of moving pieces in terms of, do we look at the whole system of corrections and what do we do? Or do we just kind of focus it more on the women's replacement facility? And Troy, you brought up trying to pull in some language from Representative Chino's bill, but that would be for the whole system or for just the women's?
Well, I
facility?
think specifically, I think the work group language could probably be pulled right out of there and inserted here and work alongside what we're trying to do with this language. I don't think that's a bad idea to have people, as we're buying land, to have people talking about how we're going to use that land. And I do think there is flexibility missing in the language as it exists, that we are looking at land that may need to serve a purpose that we haven't defined yet, if that makes sense.
So I just want the committee to know, there's already a stakeholders group that's working with DOC for what is needed within the new facility and the program. There's already a stakeholders group. We put that in place 2 years ago for this. So I just want to put that on the table for folks too. Okay, so Eric, were you gonna say something?
You had already mentioned it, but just
And then we'll go
quickly,
to Michelle.
if we're gonna put language in regards to what was presented by Representative Gina, excuse me, I would like to get the foremost experts, doctors that are well astute, well researched in the fields of corrections and correctional philosophy, as well as the implementation of facilities. I would feel more comfortable after hearing testimony from the foremost experts.
Michelle and then Wayne and then Connor.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I mean, kind of along the lines of what Troy's talking about. I mean, I feel like we've had this discussion before that, you know, we're on the cusp of making a decision about a huge new model. And whether that's, do we take the current model, put it in one place and have two parts and decide on how big we make the different parts? Like, that's one possibility. And it sounds like right now, that's what the stakeholder group is doing, is they're like, how can we make a new model with one or two buildings that's going to be better than what we have right now? And I do think that that is absolutely part of what we need. But the part that I feel like we're not doing good work at, and that isn't really being dived into deeply, is something that has been brought up a couple times here, which is looking at what are the community-based or the alternatives to just a prison or just a reentry building that could go along with this. Like, for example, if we have 25 acres, could we put 2 recovery residences on there and have people that have substance use issues get treatment in those places? So instead of having 60 detainees that are just incarcerated waiting for their trial, we could be giving them treatment. That's part of what they do in Maine. Not exactly, the model isn't exactly the same, but looking at where we could provide services in a different way than what we're doing right now is part of what I would like to see. Because I feel like we have a lot of ideas about how our big picture model could be better. But in terms of looking at some of those other alternatives, I don't feel like we've spent much time looking at that. And before we commit, like I'm okay with committing to buy the land, but I would also like us to have some kind of study group with multiple stakeholders, including people who are experts in the field, who could advise us about other things besides just that corrections model.
Wayne and then Connor.
I always try to look at things pragmatically, and we have to have a land. We know that. We got to have something, and we have an assessment. And we know that we might not be able to build them both in the same place. So we need to look at both options. And that's one word in one of those slides that we should add in here, is both. Just to make that clear. I think line 9, site location proposal, or thereabouts. I'll get back to it. But anyhow, we're never going to know. I mean, we talked about that we've come 50 years and we don't like where we've been. But then we know how much talking we were doing about in this BGS. Everybody involved in this is already looking to make these places softer and all those things. So we've already come a long ways, and there's still no way we're going to anticipate what's going to go on in 50 years. They couldn't do it 50 years ago. We can't do it 50 years down the road, right? So we're trying to do something now, and we got to move, because if we get paralyzed by analysis and don't start the first steps to get this done, then they're going to suffer, because the people in the prisons aren't going to have a solution. And what we're talking about mostly here is programmatic changes more than physical changes in the facility. And the option of having 36 places in the community is going to have to go through all those steps in terms of the community buying in. And we hear all the time about the prisoners and the conditions of the prisoners. We haven't heard a thing about the victims and the people that have been victimized. And when it comes to those discussions in the communities, your holdups are going to happen because of the feeling that people have of either their own family members being victims or victimized, or people that they know. And so we've been spending 99.9% of our time on the one side and not on the other. And I think we need to keep that in mind.
Well, we're talking about building the prisons that holds. We're not talking about housing victims. We're talking about.
That's true, but we're talking about placement of a facility someplace where.
Certainly,
right?
certainly.
And we're going to have to get permission.
We're talking about providing safety to survivors.
Right. So
knowing that offenders are secure.
Right. So we got to be cognizant of that community's concerns.
Still gonna formulate opinions, but question, I think I like just taking a step back. Like, did we miss an HOK report? I thought there was something coming to us after town meeting week. What I'm having trouble is, like, in my mind, sussing out what exactly the administration's proposing at this point and what they're not proposing to, right? I feel like those are the questions I want to get clear before taking the next step. I don't think I have clarity on that.
Can you weigh in on that? I had an impression that HOK was doing more of a final report?
Final report, Eric Filcorn, BGS. There is a more detailed version of the report in draft form now. But I talked to Sabrina and she said there's nothing substantially different from a policy perspective. So, it might have more detailed drawings of things and stuff like that, but there's nothing different about it. I don't know if that is a helpful answer.
But I think the legislative intent has been right along that there is a new model that is done, which you're gonna have an incarcerated piece. And then there'll be also a complete separate building operation of a reentry piece. Now, to get into who's housed there and how they get there, that's working deeper with DOC. We're not quite there yet to know, but the concept is that you're gonna have a campus style, that's the goal, because it's gonna be easier, more efficient and operational if they can be done on the same piece of property. Doesn't mean that's where we're gonna end up, because it's gonna depend where we can get the land. And it's gonna end up where you can, for the reentry program particularly, that it's close to where folks can go and work and can get there with transportation. So those are factors that will be weighed in when we can figure out where it's gonna be. We're kind of in a holding pattern before you know where the land is. Because then that's gonna determine, well, we can't find enough acreage, but if it's in these two communities, we could split it up and do it. So this is the cost and this is what's gonna happen.
And the global language that's in the bill this year about design standards, and I'm not gonna say the exact words
Right,
right,
the
but
evidence-based,
Representative
trauma
McGuire,
informed.
yeah, but, right?
Evidence-based.
But you have that there as kind of a marker of
Right.
this is our approach to whatever we ultimately wind up with, but we are still working with the very large, toddler level Lego blocks in this project. We haven't gotten down to the level of the fancy ones with the people in the spinning bits. That's still a little further down the refinement.
Right, so where we are in terms of how this process unfolds, we're way here at the beginning. The advocates are over here where it's already built, where the shovel's going around. We're a long ways away from that. You're not gonna see a shovel on the ground for at least 2 years. And we're not gonna know until next session, probably towards the end of next session, exactly what we're gonna be looking at. But the advocates, everybody, they're already out here, and it's like, we're not there yet. And that's what's frustrating about it. So Chip and then Tristan.
So, I agree with Wayne. I think we need to start with the land acquisition, no matter what the plan might be. I agree with Michelle in that a model that would have rehab facilities on the campus would be a great idea. But for me, being on the board at Lamoille County Mental Health and understanding that 30 open positions in that small agency, there are 60 open positions in some of the larger ones. How do we staff it? How do we get there? How do we staff that? So this whole discussion has really put me in a quandary. For 35 years, I worked hard to keep people out of jail. And in that 35 years, I met some really, really bad people. Child abusers, murderers, rapists. Every single, we represented from shoplifting to double homicides. So I understand that we need to improve after having done prisoners' rights and having 15 or 20 inmates come to me in a day when I was locked into the facility and tell me what's going on in the facility and how bad it is. And going to the superintendent and not making any progress in having conditions improve for these people. So it's really so close to me that it's really difficult. So when I think in terms of we need a new approach, we have to get there. We have to make things better for staff and for inmates both, in order to make corrections just work better, So I can't see houses around the state that can secure individuals that I have met in my career. And some of them are still in jail and some of them are dead. So, it's really difficult for me to envision this, but I do think that the understanding that this committee seems to have right now and how we can at least take the first step toward improving these conditions within our facilities for, again, both staff and inmates, really, it makes me feel that we can't look 50 years down the road at this point, that we have to react and we have to make some improvements where we can, when we can, because the process is so slow. And so, I don't know, I just wanted to get that out there. It's a difficult thing.
Nothing that I say makes me want to take away any of the things that you're trying to achieve. But then by the same token, if we make things too good, I had a cousin that spent almost his entire life in jail. And anytime that he got out of jail, he was out only for a short duration of time. He made sure he got back into jail. So that's where all of his friends were, and then he liked it in jail.
Tristan and then Mary.
Regarding the working group or more planning, I think it's really important, we're gonna build a building or more than one building, and we need to develop a plan and a program to staff that building and to provide the building is no good without the program. And I think we see that clearly, and we're gonna be working on that and asking DOC to work on that in a variety of ways. I'm not yet seen sort of an understanding of what a working group would do. It seems like you're layering on more management over management over management. And I'm personally frustrated with advocates for that working group sort of put forward questions without themselves, the reason we're speculating is it 20, is it 30? How many housing facilities in this distributed model are needed? The reason we're sitting here speculating, and then you're saying, oh, 30, it's not realistic, is that they are not willing to put forward any numbers. So we are having to do that.
I'm sorry. I am not going to villainize the advocates right now. They play a very, very, very critical and crucial role in what we do in this room. They have a job to do and they are doing it. And we are obligated to listen to those voices. And I am not willing to villainize the advocates who are working very, very hard to have represented voices in this room when access to this room is so incredibly hard to get. And that goes for those who are advocating for the workers, those who are advocating for the incarcerated, and those who are doing the work of introducing vision and paradigm shifts into this conversation. We have an obligation to listen to them, and nobody has all the answers. And it is okay to only have questions. And it is okay to demand from us that their voices be heard. That is absolutely 100% what we are here to listen to. So I'm not willing to talk about the advocates as those people. I'm going to interrupt that every time it happens.
So I think we need to be careful not to classify anybody, either workers or folks who are incarcerated or advocates or anyone as those people. I think that's really clear. And I think what we're struggling with is how are we going to approach the vision as we go forward of all the corrections, and how do we implement those paradigm shifts? That's what we're struggling with. And do we do that within the context? This is the first time This is the first time in 25 years of going forward and building a correctional facility. It's the first time. So it's new territory for everyone in this room and for our colleagues. And there's a lot of, the world is very different now than it was 25 years ago. And how are we going to bring this together in a piece of legislation is dealing with one piece of our correctional facility and knowing it's in the context that we're only going to be looking at land, but we have a bigger vision. And what is that bigger vision? And how are we going to articulate that in a capital bill that is linked to building a building? That's the linkage we have to think about. And I don't want to disparage anyone's comment. I think this is really good for the committee to have this conversation, and I want to encourage everyone to. So Tristan, you've done.
Would like to say a couple things. I feel there's an implication that I might have been villainizing some group of people. I'd be happy to walk that back or take responsibility if that's the case. It was not certainly my intention. I find it, I think if anything, I'm asking to have the conversations here in the room. I think I feel, and I see it in every one of you, responsible for making hard decisions and willing to face hard questions. Right now, we're talking about a bed count. That's going to be a number. At some point, there will be a number, and that number will become a target of attack. I would like to know, I'm looking at this pie chart that you've all seen from the HOK report of the population in CCRF, and 16% of that pie chart is sort of appropriate for reentry right now, according to DOC's analysis. And we in this committee have looked at that analysis and looked at the population. And I'm not, I think we all have some ideas here and there. We've seen some ideas here and there, but what is I'm not clear what the strategy is or what the steps are that get us from 110 or so to 0. And if there is, if we're talk about bed count, I'd like to know from some of the folks that are saying we should do nothing, or I would like to know from, some of the letters we've gotten. And I don't mean to group anyone together when I say that. I could name names, but no one's in the room, so I don't think it's appropriate to do that. But just some of the letters we've gotten, some of the advocacy we've gotten, I would personally like to know from some of those folks, well, what would be the right bed count? Because we need something. And I would like to see the conversation happen. I'd like to see it happen in this room. I don't know why we need to sort of sign things off to other groups. We have a great group in here, and I'd like to see it get really specific and really honest. And we can have a track record doing that.
Mary, did you have something?
I'm okay.
Mary, Wayne, and Eric.
I was going to say, and I appreciate the honesty we've had on most all of our discussions in here. As we've said, it's a good group. We can say the good, bad, and the ugly, and I think we take it and we try to work with everyone. But, very much, and I appreciate what Chip had to say. You're working in, and when I say trenches, I mean no disrespect to the building or the people or whatever, but you were right in the trenches working with that and still do. And I guess the concern, and that really isn't part of our job in this room, but we've got to look at it as well. I appreciate the fact that most folks talk about a community-based initiatives for corrections, but I know in our district, we don't have the people even dealing with the basic things on the street. And I don't say basic or that people in corrections have more needs than the people in our communities, but it's like they never have enough help. And when you're putting together, I think, a well-constructed plan for the future, you've got to connect those dots. So we're not just saying, you know, we're going to do this community-based care, which is great, and I'm all for. If it works and we've got the manpower and places and everything in line to do it, but we're not there yet. And, you know, for some of us who have been on the committee for a couple of years, I think we talk about, you know, different initiatives we're going to do in this capital budget. They seem like they're miles and miles away, and we're for years and years feel like, oh my God, we're still dealing with this. And unfortunately, that is somewhat the reality. I appreciate always hearing, and I sincerely mean that, the people who are either advocates or the people living it. That's a very important piece, critical. But again, I'm not totally sure, and I don't say that as a yes, no, or not. But I'm not sure if another group on top of a couple of groups or a number of groups that are looking at it, I mean, how do we pull this together so it's just not another, and not, that sounded horrible when I said it's just another group together. I don't mean that. I respect what they would probably everyone bring to the table, but I'm not sure if we're there at this point with some of the things we're not being able to fill in our state right now. And, you know, I'll work with anyone in wanting to do the right thing here, but I think we've got to somehow focus on really where we're going. But as I said, I so appreciated Chip with his comments. And, you know, you said the same thing. I said, I really don't need to talk, but I do, because I now hear it all the time in my community. You don't have the resources, you don't have the manpower to do the treatment, which we've all said is very critical to what happens in our jails, or in our, I should say, correctional facilities. And so, you know, we'll get there, but again, and we don't want it down the road. We want it kind of yesterday, but I think this is going to be in steps, unfortunately.
Wayne, and then Eric.
So you all remember quite a while back where, you know, I talked about wanting to know where all the beds were and all the purposes and all the types of beds and everything around for the whole state. We haven't got any more information now than we talked about it back then. So anybody can't make an informed decision. How can you make an informed decision on what you need and where you need it if you don't even have a good description of what we have? And that's a serious problem in my mind. And what we need then depends on how they flow into the system. Are they coming from you know, justice? Are they coming from mental health? Where are they coming from? Are they children? What are the types that we have of people there now? What are the crimes associated, or what are the health needs that are associated currently, right now? And then you can start laying out, well, what do we really need? Because we're really deficient in these areas, and where do we need that? Then you can start planning that whole thing. And you can have a million groups studying this thing. If none of them gather that basic information and go through that kind of thought process, they're never going to get to a solution that actually works. It'll be haphazard or random by chance. And random is going to take a long time to hit the right mix.
So if we did a working group, one question that we would have to resolve, I would think, what would that, where and what would that working group look at for data? Because there's got to be some data collection. If we're doing any working group or any other entity to look at how we move forward in the world of corrections and providing correctional services, they've got to have some opportunity or some place or ability to look at data and not just approach it with ideas and perceptions. Because if you're going to drive a decision-making process and policy down the road, you've got to back that up by data. And does the working group get to that level? And how would they access the data? So if we decide to do a working group, or decide to put something in place for statements, do we do a direction of looking for data? Yeah. So just hold that thought. Just put that on the table.
In holding that thought, we already know that it takes too long to build a building. So we can't just, put the brakes on and not go forward with like the female or the women's correctional facility because it just takes too long. So we have to be working simultaneously in order to try to solve the problem.
Eric and then Connor.
I'm also.
Connor?
So along with Wayne, I definitely don't feel like I have enough information to make an informed decision at this point. Some of the frustration is there's like a disconnect from judiciary too, it's kind of like, all right, what's your vision, judiciary? Like, even if you don't go through a detailed proposal, like, is the current census pretty good? Do you want to be working on that? Do you have some bold ideas that we should be like thinking of as we envision this project? So I definitely feel a disconnect from them. If the 1.5 million was spent generating that report that maybe gets spruced up.
The HOK report.
Yeah, I don't know if that was a good use of money. It's because I have kind of a vague concept of a co-located campus with a reentry unit and an incarcerated setting. And I don't know, for like 1.5, you'd think you'd get, okay, here's like 4 different options, here's what Norway does, like, let's build it out a bit.
Well, I don't think they were looking at Eric over there, correct me if I'm wrong, they were looking at our current system and our current buildings, correct?
Yeah.
And our goal was to begin, the first step was to replace the Chittenden facility, but it's also looking at our whole current system of our buildings and the deferred maintenance of those buildings, but also the programming that DOC wants to be able to do and how these buildings can augment that or hinder it.
Did the committee review the first HOK report?
Which first one, the one of 2 years
The
ago?
one that's a telephone book worth of
That came
info on our
out in
existing
21,
facilities
right?
and recommendations?
That came
We
out
had a
in
presentation here, but I don't remember if it was.
That's when we were on Zoom,
Yeah,
when you were brand new,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe I need to,
No, that was that,
Okay.
and that got crazy because that went up into high numbers
I mean,
of
we went over
beds.
to the
and that's
pavilion
when
for the
everybody went
presentation
up
this year.
right.
But it does actually go into some detail about the condition, how many people are in each facility, how they interact, and some recommendations relative to transportation and so it's more of a systemic analysis of all of our correctional facilities. It doesn't track mental health and
ECF,
that's
Yeah.
ECF, mental health.
that
all of
part
that
was outside of the scope.
In the scope.
But if you go back even further, I think Algo Bay,
Oh,
did-
that one.
yeah, he had a map of like how many, I think that was more on the DCF and mental health side, but what kind of facilities are located and what their capacities are. We've been around this.
We've been around this so many times.
yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
just kind of following up. So, I mean, part of that might be on me, but I don't feel like I have $1.5 million education in like where we are in corrections right now. I like the idea of a parallel path just to get more information on the table. Working groups, I'm skeptical of. I often think it's the illusion of public input, and if there's no teeth behind it. I mean, honestly, I try to think, what would they present to me
Well,
that would
if you-
make me deviate
if you
from
get-
like the DOC plan, And I almost think you would need to have that money behind it or something, have another like analysis, to make it real. Because nothing's real right now. Nothing's tangible to me. So it's hard to pick, right? We got to elevate voices, of course we do, and I don't know if we've done enough of that yet. But what does the working group look like? I think they kind of murder each other though, the way I'm seeing the makeup in this bill right now, just to be honest with you.
Yeah, I just want to build on what Connor was saying about judiciary, because I think that part is really important in terms of looking at the big picture. What are our numbers going to look like in terms of who we need to have an incarcerative space for at all? Like bail reform is something that could be huge. I mean, like today, the Senate is voting on a bail reform bill. If we dramatically changed our bail policy in the next year to 2 years, that could really change things. I actually asked Haley for some numbers, and she told me as of March 19th, like in the women's facility, there were 45 women that were detained, and 10 of them were held without bail. So 35 of them are held on some kind of bail, which hasn't been paid for whatever reason. But, we don't know all the details about them, but 35 is a lot. Like, that's a third of the people that were in the facility. So is there something else we could be doing with people that are detained than putting them in an incarcerated facility while we wait? I feel like that's a question that's worth asking, and it's kind of being asked. And so, like, I would like to have answers to that. I also would like to have more information about some of these other things. Like, for example, the reentry model that we've seen for Maine seems like it's doing really good work in their space. There also is a 50-bed reentry program in New Haven, Connecticut that I heard about in the last couple of weeks. And it's in the community. They have 50 women. They were incarcerated. They move into the community. It's a residential program. They get job training. They get jobs. Like, it's very comprehensive and a bit different than the Maine model, but similar. I would love to learn more about that program. I would love for a lot of us to learn about that program so that we just have a bigger pool to go fishing in before we land exactly with what numbers, what people, what places. So to me, the idea of a working group is, I mean, I don't know who it was who said we're going kind of with a lot of voices today, but I do think that it would, Tristan, I think, I do think it would be valuable for us as a group to spend more time hearing about options. But I also think we have a lot of other things that we have to do as a committee. And so having some kind of subgroup that has some legislators, some advocates, some people from DOC, some people that work in the community in mental health or recovery, that would, if we put all those heads together and gather information and then come back in January and say, wow, these are the 3 things we heard that might work in Vermont. And then maybe we can make a plan. I feel like that would be really valuable. And I need to go to another meeting. So.
Can I just comment just quickly in regards to that program in Connecticut?
It's called Emerge.
Yeah,
Yep.
and yep.
Yep.
Do you know that the level of that programming? I'm sorry, 8 years ago was that model and how it was. That was in Rutland.
I did not.
That was...
I did not know that, and that's the kind of thing I would love to know when I'm serving on this committee. Yeah.
So this is where I can get a little bit frustrated. We're talking about, wow, there's this model here. We had what she just said. That was Mandela and Sanctuary and Rutland. So what we did as a system and said, oh, yeah. That's where my frustration is coming. Is that this should have been settled years when opportunity arose. They look the other way. Here we are at this crossing point, and I agree with what everybody is saying. Everybody. The fact of the matter is, and quote me if I'm wrong, Madam Chair, that the task at hand is to decide this one piece, and then we can move forward at another time in regards to the law that has been mentioned. Am I accurate on that?
Yes, but
Okay.
I think folks don't want to wait for another time to look at a new model to look at. So that's what we're balancing. You know, in our world, it's very limited in terms of, yep, we gotta keep planning. We gotta figure out and get the land so that we really know more if we're gonna do it cohesively or it's gonna be spread out. But there's also the other factor or thinking, what do you do within those buildings? But there's also another view that says you don't need these buildings. Do it totally different. Do the whole correctional system totally different. So you got 3 different focuses here. And we're trying to, number one, we got to get this bill out tomorrow. So come a long ways on the reentry piece, women's facility. Number 2, do we add more policy decisions in our capital bill, which is not really appropriate for the capital bill on a bigger scale, unless it's connected specifically to replacing the chicken facility? It's a fine line when you're looking at dollars for capital projects, and then there's a lot of policy that people want to put in that's a much bigger policy than that particular project you're funding. That can get really dicey in this bill. Maybe you do a separate bill because it would go to a separate committee in the Senate. Because institutions committee in the Senate does not deal with correction. So whatever language we put in, they don't have the concept of understanding corrections because they don't deal with corrections. That's judiciary committee in the Senate. So that's the other piece that plays in here. So if we put language in to really start looking and broaden our proposals of what we're looking for, as we would go forward and replace our correction. So I think we would put in some broad language. In terms of real specifics, it's going to get lost on the capital in the Senate. Just put that on. They're not going to have that level of in the corrections world. And then who knows what track that will do. Tristan?
Trying to bring it back around to getting this bill out, Madam Chair, the language currently in there to me is adequate for moving us forward. And knowing that there's a lot in the air in the future, but we're gonna get there.
Unfortunately, people outside of this committee may not have that. That's what we're struggling.
Well, I understand that if there's language that we can talk about that would bring us home, I'd love to get into it. I'm trying to kind of get back to what it is.
I could see some benefits in a separate bill. One, it would give an opportunity for people to testify on that bill specifically, if they feel like they've been a bit shut out of the process so far. The bill would also, if it passed, likely pass before the capital bill, which is going to be one of the last bills passed. So it could inform it with the language at the very end game there. I also do like the idea of probably dealing with Senate judiciary on this rather than Senate institutions, and feel they may be more like-minded with some of the stuff we're throwing out here. So the separate bill would suit me. As long as we made a commitment to do it,
I think the language sums up the task at hand. See where we're going with any.
We have the task.
Yeah, but
But we also have the other piece where people have a vision and they're seeing us wanting to take steps in. So the question is, what is the most appropriate vehicle to do that? Gina?
I think it's absolutely a separate bill. I think it confuses things to put it in the capital bill. I think that the impetus is on moving forward as quickly as possible with the new women's facility. I think that, we've come a long way in corrections. I'm sure, as Wayne and Troy have mentioned, we have a lot farther to go, but we need to change what we have right now and move forward. And if there's a need for more study and options in corrections, I think it's a totally separate issue than what's in the capital bill.
I think we need, Becky, where is the language about the trauma-informed, the evidence-based design? That's with our St. Albans booking. Where is that in the bill?
So there's language specific to the booking expansion, and then there's statutory language requiring that going forward. The specific
Booking
language is on page 30, section 25.
So it's the design of correctional facilities, use of evidence-based design principles for wellness environments. So this is a catch-all. And I'm wondering if we pick up, I know this is a catch-all for both what we're doing for the booking beds. But I wonder if we are specific in terms of the women's facility that we pick up. The BGS would coordinate with DOC on the design and planning of the construction of the replacement of the women's facility to ensure that evidence-based design principles for wellness environments are incorporated into the design and planning phase of the project. I wonder if we pick that up specifically and put it also in the section of the policy on section 26. So it's really linked with the women's correctional facility at this point. Just a thought.
My question of that is that the section 26 is specific to a site location, so I'm not sure how you could use those principles for land, but I'm not an expert on those principles.
But I'm seeing it as splitting it up. I'm saying it's the intent that the General Assembly, when evaluating site location, that our priority, that would be one. And then the next, another section
Okay.
would be, it wouldn't be in that paragraph.
Okay, so it's not specific to the site location. It's
No,
just
specific to the planning of the,
Okay,
going forward and replacing the Chittenden facility.
so when BGS is working on the planning and design, that they incorporate those principles
With DOC.
with DOC. Although, I mean, you can certainly add it in. I think if the statutory change in the previous section goes into law, then when they actually start planning that. Yeah, I
know
understand.
But there's perception.
Yep.
Because people won't go back to that section on page 30 and see section 170A and think that's changing law.
So really what we're saying is, in all elements of planning for any correctional facility, we want this to apply.
That's in top of page 30. That's what is said. But I'm just saying belts and suspenders for people outside this room and for the public that's not used to reading legalese and how you connect it, that we also pick up some statements like that and put it specifically in section 26.
We can't
As
say
a starting point. Just, is that workable for members for that piece?
Yeah.
Yes.
And maybe we also pick up language, Becky, because we put language in, was it 21? 22, we had language about a stakeholder group working with DOC. We had language somewhere with that, I believe, with the women's facility.
Not in this bill, you mean in previous bills?
Previous. Maybe we pick that back up and see if we wordsmith that a little bit. Because there's already a stakeholders group working with DOC on the programming piece.
So what would this be a new group or the same
No,
group?
I want to see the language that's currently that we put in previous capital bills and see if we could adapt that a little bit. Because if the stakeholders group is still working and still in place, can we build off of that? Instead of setting up a brand new working group when there's already someone working with DOC on some of this. But there was language somewhere in previous legislation.
Yeah, I'm just
I don't know.
trying to recall who I worked with on that. I think it was in 2020.
Was it 2020, number 50 or number? Too many bills. It was something about a stakeholders group. Oh, we put that in.
Yeah, there's was language in 2020
What,
that said section 22.
was it 2020 we did this, not 21?
I don't know if this is a report. Let's see if this is. Oh, that's on a bed count capacity estimate and programming framework for a potential new women's reentry center to be managed by DOC. The estimate and programming framework shall incorporate the related findings, analysis, and recommendations on justice reinvestment 2 in Vermont by the Council of State Governments.
And that was done in 2020. Can you and I sit down with some of this, Becky, and just kind of see if there's something, is the committee okay with that if Becky and I sat down with previous language was put in previous capital bills and see if we can wordsmith something up?
Absolutely not.
Are you serious?
No.
You're gonna be overruled.
I think you just volunteered for,
Huh?
I think you just volunteered for something.
Yeah, we could put Eric and Becky. But we put in previous language, and let's see what we've put in, and then see how that can meld possibly.
Absolutely.
People okay with that?
Absolutely.
So Becky and I can do that, and we don't have to do it on the spot.
Does this go back to the Alco Bay?
Oh my God, I can't go back.
No,
I don't think it's
that.
that.
It's not that.
When did we first? There's the stakeholders. We put in language that the stakeholders have to work. DOC has to work with the stakeholders.
And they have been,
Yeah.
On the women's facility. Now, that language was somewhere in a capital bill.
it might have been, well, I mean, I think it really kicked up last year.
Yeah, but they were late getting started, because last year we had to give them.
Right, and how
I think the language-
often?
I
do
think
they-
the last year.
Language may be in the bill last year.
Yes.
Well, I have last year's bill, and the year before. So before taking up more committee time, because we have to get to lunch. We're on the floor at 1. We're gonna have a long afternoon, and I'm worried about getting this bill out tomorrow. Folks, we may have to pull you off the floor during some boring times.
I'm trying to,
I know.
if there's anything boring.
Right.
Just
Watch
wave
Chip,
this way,
watch
we'll
me.
be-
Sometimes I'll do this.
Yeah.
Okay?
You see that? That's the signal.
She's going to do a road.
Sometimes she sends you little
Round it up.
messages.
Bring us in.
Yes, go to the back behind the podium and then you don't go.
When you're looking at presenting,
Presenting, we gotta get it out of this committee, then it goes to approps, and I have to present it to approps.
so it's gonna be a
The
while.
big bill's on the floor next week, Thursday and Friday. We have a caucus of the whole on the big bill at noon on Wednesday. So we have to schedule this bill going wherever approps is, they still call it upstairs. And I have to present this bill to the approps committee. So it depends on their schedule. We've got to get this bill out. The money, I think we can put that together pretty quickly. Maybe this afternoon, we can finish that up. Maybe I can pull you off the floor, see what happens over the next few hours. And pull you off the floor, and if you can, BGS can get the numbers on those 2 things.
Eric's working on it.
Eric and Al are working on, Joe.
Alan, or now someone said Al. Eric and Joe are working on it.
Yes, so if we could get those numbers this afternoon, that would be a great help.
The only thing that I would say, Madam Chair, to that is I've talked about how important planning and programming is, and we're not there. And so we're gonna give you a figure. We're gonna have no idea how close we are.
I know.
So
Yeah,
We
I think
gotta
this
be-
is just gonna be a
it's gonna be
standard burn
throwing
rate for
spaghetti on the
planning.
wall because we
That's a
don't,
guess.
we don't know.
We got it, but there's 2 things that are important.
Not saying it's not important, just to say that we're gonna give you a number, and I don't know how accurate that number is going to be.
So any dangling language, we need to figure out how we do a check-in with the correctional facility going forward. And a check-in with the HVAC system in the state house.
Sorry, check in with the
On
correction.
the HVAC system.
So both of those deal with.
Right.
Yeah.
We haven't decided yet. So I'm wondering, instead of trying to do a joint fiscal committee, would it be better that if those 2 projects are checked in with this committee? Knowing that we can't act in the off session.
Wait, say that again, please.
The correctional facility replacement, should there be a check on this? People in this building want to check in to make sure it's not delayed, that it keeps going on track. So do we do that with joint fiscal committee, who can make a formal action, but what are they making a formal action on? We can't figure that out. So should we just have them check in with this committee and Senate? The other one is the HVAC system in the state house. So that project doesn't get delayed. This is people who are in the building who are feeling that BGS is dragging their heels and not putting us as a priority and going forward with this project. So they want to check in to make sure it keeps moving. The only committee that can take an action off session is joint fiscal committee. What are they going to be taking an action on? Is what we're trying to figure out.
That's right, Madam Chair, because State House HVAC, we finished phase 1 in terms of design. We ordered the air handler units. And as
We
soon as they
know all
come,
that.
we're doing that, right? Phase 2, we're done. So we're gonna start ordering air handler units. So then starting design for phase 3. So that's where we are right now. And if we have hold points, it could cause delays. I have no problem being accountable. I have no problem giving updates. We're happy to come in every day and give an update. I just worry about there being a possible delay as a result of whatever decisions you make in language.
So the question is, who would be the oversight that looks at it? It's standing committees, institutions, they can't make decisions out of session.
I think
So
we
we
have
have
to
to
have
go
a
to
dri- I
joint
think we have to
fiscal.
have a drive-by so we know what is going to be talked about in the other next committee. Whether
Well,
it's
that's-
joint, whichever one.
Right, but we've got to put, what are they gonna, what's joint fiscal committee gonna react to? That's what we're grappling with. So be
Right.
thinking about that. Any other danglers out there for language, Becky? Outside of what we're just working on with,
Uh, So the HVAC you're talking about is just for correctional facilities, but you can make, oh, sorry,
I'm sorry. HVAC, the what?
the state house.
Yeah, the check-in on the state house, not the correctional facility HVAC. The HVAC for the state house, for the correctional facility will be dollars.
Right, the language though, is that where you're, the one you were just talking about, the language for the check-in for the state
State
house? The heat pump system?
No, CHP.
No, that's
No,
already in here.
Yeah, I'm saying that's a decision point. That still needs to be clarified.
I thought we already did that. We did the
Yeah.
water to water.
We do.
Yeah.
No, but you have placeholder language in there right now saying there's gonna be something, BGS is submitting something by October 15th, and then it says for discussion.
You guys are talking about the same exact thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're
It's
right in
not
line
the
with each
water
other.
to water heat pump. It's the whole phases of the HVAC system,
Okay, so
the state house.
I guess the question is what exactly, rather than who they're submitting it to,
What
what
is it?
what are they submitting? Yeah,
And if we can't figure out what they're submitting,
do you need language
maybe what we do is just check in with the standing committees.
on the status of the project?
Right, that's what I'm trying to get at.
What possibly could go wrong that would require permission?
That's what we're trying to figure out.
I'm more than happy to come in every day and tell you exactly where that project is at. So happy to provide a project update. What I
Maybe
worry
you gotta
about,
knock on somebody else's door.
what I worry about is if we put a hold point into the project and we can't move forward on a decision and we have to wait for a committee and then BGS gets blamed because we had to hold. So, summertime boiler is a great example where that got kicked a year. I'm not picking or blaming anyone, but it got kicked a year, right? And now we are all set. A decision has been made in this committee. I could order today, but I was told I can't because there was statutory language put in last year. So now if you add up the time, we're causing a delay on the summertime boiler, which BGS does not own. And I'm not pointing fingers, I'm just saying that that's the consequence of when we put this language into the bill.
So you could have monthly updates to the committee, starting in, September or something like that.
Maybe that's the way to go. For both the reentry piece and that state house HVAC.
So for the women's facilities, the site location proposal is just monthly updates to the standing committees. And then the intent language on the principles being included in the design, programming and design and planning.
All the principles we just talked
Yeah,
about.
the wellness-based, evidence-based wellness principles.
So is that it for language, just kind of dangling out there?
Well, I don't know if in my absence, the committee discussed the State House expansion related language on the statutory change to the commissioner's duties, but that is in this version of the bill.
Down, what page is that?
Page 33, section 29. Having a moment where I'm realizing I think all I've consumed today is coffee. All I've consumed today is coffee and
You gotta eat lunch.
section 29.
Oh, this, yeah, we haven't looked at that. I explained it.
Okay, do you want me to walk through it? Because I'm anticipating you want me to come back with a draft 1.4, so.
Give us, yeah, walk through.
Okay.
We're gonna keep working a little bit here, folks. So later on.
So sections 29 and 30 relate, in some ways relate both to the State House expansion and just generally to any construction renovation projects in legislative space. So section 29 has language that says BGS has contracted with Freeman to develop programming and a schematic design for the expansion of the State House, which will be finalized when the General Assembly is not in session in June 2023 and November 2023 respectively. So my understanding is the programming is report will be June and then the schematic design in November. And it is the intent of the General Assembly to approve the programming for schematic design plan for the State House expansion as soon as practicable to allow BGS to enter into contractual agreements to begin the design development phase of the expansion. And I look to the experts on whether that is the correct term.
So I wouldn't use programming when you talk about schematic design because programming is actually phased. So I may say something more along the lines of like the alternative that's selected or something. I just think that you're gonna be mixing up that term because we use programming.
On the timeline, it says June 23rd from Freeman will get the program.
That is correct. I'm just saying that like when we say programming right in front of schematic design, I just think the way that you're wording it, do you know what I mean? Because you're not talking about a phase in that particular case.
To develop the programming phase and a schematic design phase.
Yeah, so what's gonna happen is we're running alternatives, right? We got 3 different alternatives we're looking at. And we're gonna run those 3 alternatives through schematic, but at some point, someone's gonna need to make a decision as we're running 3 alternatives.
Right, and that's what we're.
And we have to pick one at some point, otherwise we're wasting money by continuing to do 3 different designs. You know, continuing to progress. with 3
Right,
different
so we're
designs.
gonna figure out, the thinking was, the program's gonna bring in 2, 3, 4 options.
Yep.
And then the Joint Legislative Management Committee will, with the 2 chairs, of the Institutions Committee, will make a decision on which one of those to go forward, and then the schematic design will reflect the one that's chosen.
That all sounds good. The only thing that I just want to get on the record and for testimony, and I think there's some money that's been appropriated through the capital bill, or you're planning on doing that. At some point, if the study comes back and it says what you did during COVID, having 2-4 Aiken, having the connector, I'm just making this up, is what they would recommend from an ARPA funding perspective. We don't have, and you pick State House expansion, we cannot continue to use the ARPA dollars, right, to continue on in that process. We would need a different funding source.
So that's a decision the management committee would have to weigh and make.
That's correct.
In leadership in the management committee, the folks who are on the legislative management committee are the speaker and president pro tem. And then there's 3 members at large from the House and 3 members at large from the Senate. And we looked at the makeup of the membership. I can't remember what's what.
Who are the members at large from both bodies?
Pardon?
Who are the members at large from both?
That's what
bodies?
I just said. You can look it up. I can't remember who it was, but it looked like there was some folks that.
So that's potentially another stopping point, right? So if we get to a certain point and you pick something different than what is ultimately recommended from an ARPA viewpoint, then that's a stopping point for us. We can't go any further. So I'm just trying to be really clear where the hold points are so that in a year from now, we don't get ourselves into
Wait,
trouble.
can you say that again?
So ARPA is only under ventilation, and physical distancing, and they're gonna take a look at what you did during the pandemic specifically.
Right.
And so if that means from an ARPA perspective, and again, I'm just saying this could be an outcome, I'm not saying this will be the outcome, but these are the things that we need to think about. If the outcome from that study comes back and it says, you're good, legislature, you should use 248 and you should use the connector, you don't need an expansion because you have these other areas, which was clearly articulated when we met with Guidehouse and Doug, and Janet Miller was in on those conversations, so she was there, heard all of this. But if it comes back and says what you did during the pandemic, which is really what this money is all about, then it will not recommend, or you will no longer be able to use ARPA funds to continue to go beyond to do an expansion, because the study came back and said, just do institutionalize what you did during the pandemic, if that makes sense.
I know
So
what
it's
you're
just another
saying here.
stopping point.
I know what you're saying, and that's where the management committee could then say, okay, we're gonna continue doing an expansion, and we know we're not gonna get ARPA funds.
Right, so
They could make that
They
decision.
could.
What we need to do, folks in the committee, is think about that decision being made, and do we put in the backup money in the capital bill for the State House expansion? So in case that happens, the money is there to continue going into schematic design. That's what we look at. Yeah. Eric,
have that number?
we won't have
but they're
those numbers.
working on that number.
Yeah.
Eric,
No, to take the place of the ARPA money.
we don't even know how, we're talking about an expansion of 24 million. We put 1.4 million of ARPA dollars for just the planning process. So what could come back is, okay, we have extended some of this with ARPA, but if you think you're gonna be able to use ARPA for more of it and you can't, that's a decision the joint management committee could make.
But don't we have to decide if it's our top priority here in the committee as well?
Yeah, I'm just.
Okay,
putting this
no,
out on
I'm
the-
just putting it out there. Eric.
Madam Chair, you did already call on me, so it's not my new problem.
No, I got one.
I just heard back from Joe,
Yeah.
and the answer on the State House and the answer on the corrections HVAC is the same, which is there is enough current funding at the burn rate of a generic project, because we haven't selected options yet, to get them through July of next year. So presuming that the funding, that the State House project is still eligible for funding under the path that you choose, we're fine. But if, as the commissioner said, if there is an option selected that's not eligible, well,
Right,
there's a
you need
monkey
some-
wrench.
right.
So
So
but
we gotta
know
put
that
some money in.
we still have enough gas in the tank to get us to July on both of those. Again, that's a
Thank you.
generic design project because we don't know which thing it will be yet.
And then there's perception of it.
And we want to avoid a stop sign in July.
And I just am trying to be clear where those stop points are.
Yeah.
So we're very
So,
open and honest.
so
and transparent.
what we're trying to avoid that stop sign is joint management committee is made up on the House side, the Speaker of the House, Representative Kathleen James, Representative Teresa Wood, Representative Wood Shaw. On the Senate side, Senator Philip Baruth, Pro Tem, Senator Jane Kitchell, Senator Nader Hassim, I almost have trouble with this, Hassim, and Senator Randy Brock. And then what the language says is that the two chairs would become members of that committee specifically for these decisions. Now, the other option, you could do joint fiscal committee, but they don't meet until September. I don't even know if they have a July meeting.
They'll meet in July.
They'll meet in July. But you delayed possibly. March. So we're trying to keep this going. We're trying to do it with some committees that have some background in terms of money and in terms of construction. So where were we? We were on A. And
Can I just read some updated language to make sure I've got the correct terms.
Yeah,
Okay, so the Department of Buildings and General Services has contracted with Freeman French Freeman to develop programming options that will be the basis for a schematic design for the expansion of the State House. Is that correct? Okay.
Perfect.
The programming options will be finalized in June 2023 and the schematic design in November 2023 when the General Assembly is not in session. It is the intent of the General Assembly to approve the programming option for a schematic design plan for the State House expansion as soon as practicable to allow the Department of Buildings and General Services to enter into contractual agreements to begin the design development phase of the expansion. And then subsection B is the special committee is being established, and right now it's joint legislative management and the chairs of the institutions committees. The special committee is authorized to meet to review, approve, or recommend alterations to the schematic design described in subsection A at a regularly scheduled joint legislative management committee meeting, and I think those can be called
at any time.
yeah, and so in making the decision, there's a few considerations, and this is just a starting point for the committee. You can add to this, but I put how the design impacts the ability of the General Assembly to conduct legislative business, allows for public access to citizens, the financial consequences to the state of approval or disapproval of the proposal, and whether any potential alternatives are available.
Thoughts? I know it's lunchtime.
Go for it.
I don't see anything.
Yeah,
That's
I
good.
think that's fine. I think it's very.
So let's look at section 30, because this is kind of in conjunction.
Okay, so section 30 is amending the statutory duties of the Commissioner of PGS. And so it is adding a new requirement that Commissioner shall consult at least 2 times per month with the Sergeant at Arms or designee on any maintenance, renovation, or construction projects for the State House or other legislative space.
It's just to keep the lines of communication open, so there aren't any interpretations that interpretations sometimes can lead to different decisions or different perspectives or perceptions of the project. So it's an attempt to keep all sides informed.
This is specific to the project or changing the,
Any maintenance, renovation, or construction project. So anytime there's any maintenance that occurs in the State House, such as the elevator, because that's popped up. Anytime there's renovations. Because they renovated, moved some rooms, and BGS is the one that's really responsible for moving the desks and the chairs and all of that. Or any construction or HVAC system. Or expansion.
Madam Chair, I'm always, communication is in my top 5. The deputy is, communication is in his top 5 strengths as well. Janet calls Dave, our deputy commissioner, up to 4 times a day. So we certainly have no problem with communicating with the Sergeant at Arms. I think it's a little extreme to put it in revised statutory duties in the language. That said, we do it anyway, so I'm not really opposed to doing, putting something in language that we already do. I just feel that it's a little extreme to change statutory duties for that. And the other thing that we are going to be doing, which you're all hopefully going to love, is noting that communication is not our strength area. We're actually hiring someone to help us with communication. And it will be their responsibility to work with the project managers to, at least on a quarterly basis, provide an actual project update on all line item projects in the capital bill, and obviously any other sort of major maintenance projects, for example, that could be very disruptive to state employees, for example. And so we're going to be doing that anyway. So you're all going to get at least quarterly updates on all the line item projects. Get ready for your emails to be blasted on a quarterly basis. So again, we recognize that communication is an area we can improve upon. We're already making a plan to do just that. But what I would also like to see in the language, if we're going to put it in there, is that the sergeant of arms also coordinates with us, because to your point, one of the things that we always struggle with is right before the assembly comes back, there's a lot of scrambling and it's always last minute requests from this building about all the different things that they need, things we need to modify. Happy to do all those things for you guys. We're here to help provide you a service, but having the sergeant at arms also being, two-way conversation about what the needs are of the General Assembly and putting that in the language, if it's gonna be there, I think would be very helpful as well.
Let's do some thinking.
Can I ask a question? Does the statutory definition of the commissioner's job description say this for every other state agency or body that DGS works with?
It does not.
So this should be the one.
There are some examples of requirements for the commissioner to consult with other agencies or departments on certain types of things, like not set amounts of time, but for example, I think there was one in there about consulting with the Secretary of Education when requested concerning school construction projects, things. So there are some other examples of consultation on certain types of projects.
But in that example, right, we used to do education at BGS for colleges, right? So in that example, when we stopped doing that, our role was to help AOE. So if they were working on school construction, we were there to advise them if needed. I will tell you, in the last 6 years, I think I've only advised AOE once during that time period, when they were directed to do a study by the legislature. I had to do with school construction, and so they consulted with us as part of that language.
It seems like legislating the job description seems 2 times per month, so specific.
We're only dealing with the politics here.
We're dealing with lots of politics here. That's what we're dealing with. We're only trying to open up avenues of communication and how to best approach that. And might be a way just to keep it here, the language here, and see how it plays out as we go through the session.
If they really don't like it, they'll amend it in some other committee someplace.
Sure. So think about it, folks. Anything else, Becky?
Just so I can unhighlight it from this draft, I just wanted to point out, I guess, can I point out 3 things so that they're not
This is helping your workload to help us.
Yes. So page 24, section 20, the language that is allowing BGS to list property with a real estate agent. I just wanted to, I put in some subdivisions because this was a very long paragraph that didn't make a ton of sense. So I put in a new subdivision 2 that says if the commissioner elects to sell the property at auction or by sealed bid, notice shall be posted A, by electronic means, or B, in at least 3 public places, with the being published in the newspaper.
That was our intent. So
Okay, so I'll take that off the list. Section 21, sale of properties for 110 State Street. I added back in the right of first refusal to the city of Montpelier.
Yeah, that's what we wanted. Okay.
If you move to page 27, section 22, relocation of state employees in Burlington. I removed the reference to the Department of Health. So it's just for state employees who work at 108 Cherry Street. And I also clarified that that she'll work with the city of Burlington to find another appropriate location in downtown Burlington.
That needs some wordsmithing because it's not to work to find another appropriate location downtown Burlington to relocate state employees. The state employees include the administrative part of Department of Health, who are planning to move to out there. What we want for appropriate
Services.
location in
State employees who
downtown.
provide direct services.
Client
Yeah, the
services.
client
Yeah.
services, departments that provide the client
So you could
services.
say instead of work, you could say consult.
And we met with the city of Burlington last week on Friday, and again, reinforce our commitment to having these employees located in downtown Burlington.
Are you optimistic about that relationship?
The meeting with Burlington,
Yeah,
I thought it was great.
they had, the mayor sent us a letter, or we got copied on the letter the mayor sent to you, I think. And then there just hasn't been a lot of, what do you need? So we asked, me and the rest of the Burlington reps asked, what do you need? We haven't gotten a lot of, but I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah, no, I thought it was there, it seemed very happy from my perspective. Everybody was happy to meet. We again reinforced our commitment to Burlington. And we talked about some potential spaces that are either online now or maybe coming up as an opportunity, and they're gonna keep letting us know as spaces become available. So I felt that it was very collaborative and very supportive.
Thank you.
Two more things, next section 23, I will unhighlight this, just to note that this is the language you all looked at yesterday about unexpended funds that I took from that the orphan language that you were looking at with the cash fund, and I put it in the bill. I haven't changed it at all. It's
So this is the language of what we worked through for the reserve fund, capital reserve. So it'll be here and it'll be in the roads.
This is just the unexpended fund reallocation process for the capital bill. The cash fund language you worked on, which was the first 3 sections of what we went over yesterday, I sent to the appropriations committee.
Yeah, but isn't this language on 27, 28?
Yeah, so this is just dealing with how you get the reporting, the notification on unexpended funds, and having that maximum amount of time of 5 years. There is, I think if you look at
I'm confused.
page 28,
Isn't this the language that we agreed to for the capital reserve fund and what it can be used for?
no,
This is street vote.
this is,
I thought we were all. Never mind.
I thought, my understanding was that you wanted that language to be in the big bill, and that, so there were 4 sections.
The report section would be in our bill, and then the structure of the fund would be upstairs.
Yes, so I sent that to the appropriations committee. So I will unhighlight that. And then the last thing I just wanted to note was, I heard back from Fish and Wildlife, and their preference is to have the line item as is currently in the bill of just the general infrastructure projects that they've had for the last several years.
And did you get the email from Forest and Parks?
Yes, I made that change as
I
well.
need that change. So combining.
If you, I can point you to that so I can sort of unhighlight it.
Which one, the Forest and Parks?
Yeah, so that is on page 11, lines 13 through 18. And then page 12, lines 10 through 14. And then the Fish and Wildlife language was on page 11, lines 19 through 20, 19 through the top of page 12. So they were okay with how it is currently presented in the book.
Okay, I'm going on a song and a prayer to say okay.
Okay.
Based on the emails that we received from Forest and Parks and Fish and Wildlife. So that will change the spreadsheet a little bit, won't it?
Yes.
Yes, we'll have to work with Dan on that.
Okay. For the next draft, do you want me to put in any numbers, at least maybe the reallocation numbers, or are you still Or do you want the draft for tomorrow to be the one with the numbers?
Which is easier for you?
And I think, yeah, okay, tomorrow. I mean, I would prefer to start getting as much of the numbers in as I can.
Yeah.
So maybe I can at least have the
absolutely.
reallocation numbers in the bill for the next draft.
Yeah.
Just so that tonight isn't.
Yeah.
You don't need a personal life, right?
So
Whatever's easiest.
what I would
One
like,
does need.
if we have time when we get off the floor, if we can, this afternoon, I want to finalize the dollar amounts. So a new draft would not be available until tomorrow, right, Becky?
Sorry, a new
A
draft.
new draft won't be available until tomorrow. Right?
My hope is I can sit down and in the next, I might be have another draft by like 3, if you had time.
Let's, I'll see how this plays out. I don't know, the floor is gonna be so long today, and we're gonna be here until the evening, so.
Do you want me to just email you when I
Yeah,
have?
but you and I have to talk about trying to get that language of the stakeholders thing, what kind of words is that? Dan,
Dan Dickerson, GFO. I could probably have another spreadsheet done fairly quickly if that was easier to go through this
That would be
afternoon. If you're just
easier.
looking to solidify the numbers, I
Yeah.
can get the reallocations in.
let's at least do that this afternoon, and tomorrow I'm thinking of coming in at 8:30 tomorrow morning.
That's fine.
What time is floor tomorrow?
Pardon?
What time is floor tomorrow?
9:30.
9:30, okay.
At least if we can get the dollars put in place, and in a few hours, we ought to know a little bit more about the reallocation.
Madam Chair, I think it's time for lunch. We've
I know.
got 10 minutes.
Yes.
No. So let's break